Hello, my name is Peter Parfitt. Welcome to New Brit Workshop. I've been asked a number of times to say something about the air tools that I use, and I've also been asked to talk about what compressor I've got. And I've sort of been toying with the idea of doing one and then the other, and I've realised that actually one's got to talk about them both, and I think you'll understand what I mean in a minute. Now, I don't keep my compressor in the main body of the workshop. I keep it in the attic space up above. And it's pretty clean up there and doesn't get any of the sort of woodworking dust creeping up there at all. And that's important for a compressor. A compressor's taking air in all the time. And the cleaner the air that comes in, the less work that the filters have got to do before that air is then compressed for you to use it and so on. Now, my space up above is pretty clean, as I say, and when I got rid of the old machine, which I'd had for about 22 years, it looked absolutely brand new. And it actually looked too good to get rid of, but there were a couple of issues with it. And one of the issues was that its tank was a bit too small for the tools that I wished to use. And I'm going to talk about the tools first and then go back and talk about the compressor. Now, my tools are pretty basic, and I've accrued these over a number of years. At the front here is the only item that didn't come from Axminster, and this is from Sealy, and it's my tyre pressure gauge, and that is absolutely brilliant. And I made a video about this probably a couple of years ago now, but it's a good bit of kit. I've then got a couple of air staplers, and this one, the small one, takes these little staples like that, which is quite useful for upholstery. This one takes staples which have a slightly different profile, and they come in various lengths, and these are the medium length ones I've got there. And these are quite good if you're making doors for something like a shed or a workshop, because you can fix the tongue and groove board onto the frame quite nicely with these fairly hefty staples. I've got this little air blower. I must confess I don't use this anymore. I used to use it until I started doing my workshop dust study, and I then realised that you don't want to blow dust around the workshop. It's not good for you. Then I've got two nailers here. I've got an 18 gauge brad nailer, and it puts nails in up to a size of about 50 millimeters, and they come quite short as well. I think 15 millimeters is the shortest length, and this one machine can handle all of those. And then I've got this framing nailer, which takes nails which are collated on a strip like this, and this is what I used when I built that barn of mine. Now, these tools are all pretty similar, and they consist of a magazine section, which is along the bottom here, a trigger for firing the gadget off, a connection to your air supply, and then inside here is an air-driven piston with a sort of firing pin, and the firing pin comes down onto the next staple or the next nail that's to be fired, and sends it into the material. And with some of these you can adjust the depth that it's going to fire the staple or the nail in. Now, I've deliberately put this oil bottle here. Now, I've got this habit that when I'm about to use a tool, I put a couple of drops of oil down where the air supply goes in, a couple of drops of oil there. I then use the tool. If I'm using it all day, I might repeat that process once or twice. And then when I put the tool away, I stand the tool upright and I put a couple of drops of oil in again before it goes to bed for the night. And the oil I use is very fine oil. There's all sorts of it available, and there's a lot available, especially for nail guns. It just happens to be in this bottle in my case. Now, when you get to a machine like this one, this is my little brad nailer. The release of the magazine is there. And the way this is set out is such that you can remove whatever size, I think that looks like 25 millimeter ones, and then put in these big ones in here. And so the one magazine will do for a variety of sizes of brad. And on this machine there's a little adjuster here which allows you to adjust the amount or the depth of the head of the brad after it's been fired into the material. And that will vary according to the length of the brads you're firing and also the material itself. And in order to fire one off, you just pull the trigger here. Now, after each percussion, a bit of air comes out, air is released, and that comes out through a little vent here, which you can turn to face away from you. And because I use quite a lot of oil, as I've said already, then this exhaust air can be a little bit slightly oily, and so I normally have that pointing well away from me. Now, whenever you're using air tools, it's really important to have ear defenders, and especially important to have eye protection. Now, in order for these tools to operate as they have been designed, they need a certain pressure and a certain airflow in order for them to operate well. Now, these tools here, that's my brad nailer, my two staplers, and my tire inflator, worked pretty well with my old, very small compressor. But if I was inflating my truck tires, then my old compressor actually struggled a little bit to supply sufficient air when I was using that. But most of the time it was fine. However, my big framing nailer, my old compressor really did struggle. It wasn't delivering enough free air. The pressure was there, but it just wasn't delivering enough. And it's really the framing nailer and the tire inflator that caused me to change my compressor. And there's also one other thing, and if I turn the compressor on now, you'll realise what I'm talking about. That's the compressor running flat out. And when the compressor reaches its target pressure, it automatically switches off, as you've just seen. Now, there is underneath here a bleed valve, and if I operate it just a little bit, you could hear the air escaping. Now, it's really important with a compressor that at the end of each day you release that valve at the bottom, because you'll have got some moisture from the atmosphere which will condense inside, and by releasing that valve, that moisture is forced out of the machine. Now, this particular compressor came from Axminster, and it's made by a company called Swan, who've got a very good reputation in the compressor field. Now, I wanted a larger machine, but they do a fairly compact model in this silent running range, oilless and silent running. And that's a great advantage if you're on a job site. I know professional friends of mine who take their tools to various places, into people's homes, into schools and colleges and things like that. And they're trying to do their work without disturbing the people around them. And having one that's running fairly silent, as these do, is an absolute boon. Now, when you're buying a compressor, you need to look at several factors and see if the compressor suits your actual requirement. Now, the way you're going to judge that is, of course, to look at the tools you're going to use and to find out what those tools require in terms of pressure and in terms of free air delivery. Now, free air delivery is the volume of compressed air delivered in a given length of time, and it's expressed normally as either cubic feet per minute or litres per minute. And on top of that, you need to establish what size receiver or container for the compressed air that you need. If you have a very small receiver, then that means that you may have to wait whilst the compressor refills that every now and again in order to reach the operating pressure of your tools again. In my case, when I was using that big framing nailer with my old compressor, I would fire it about 3 or 4 times, and then I'd have to wait for the compressor to catch up. This is the DRS 21550, has a 50-litre tank. And that means I could use that framing nailer as fast as I could go, and it would be able to keep up with me with no problem at all. Now, the next consideration is whether you want an oilless compressor or not. An oilless compressor has nowhere for oil to be put into it to lubricate the working parts. The advantage of that is that the compressed air is relatively clean, and that means you can use spray tools without having to filter the air before it goes into the tool. If you've got a compressor that uses oil, then you'd have to filter that out before it reaches your spray gun. And the other advantage of an oilless machine is that your maintenance cycle is much lower, and you don't have to check it every day to make sure the oil is topped up and so on. Now, there are additional features of the Swan range of compressors which I like. The inside of the tank is actually coated, and that means that when it does get moist in there, it's not going to start rusting from the inside outwards. And that is a common problem with compressors. If you have a poorly manufactured receiver, then once it gets wet, which it frequently will do because it's compressed air, is very, very moist, then you're going to get this rusting slowly but surely. And it has happened to me with a very, very old compressor I had many years ago. You eventually get a hole in it, and all of a sudden you start hearing this noise as the air just leaks out, and you can't do anything about it. You've got to throw it away. Now, when you buy your compressor, there are one or two extras that you're going to need to get besides the air tools themselves. And the most fundamental thing you'll need is an air line. Now, at the moment, I've got this curly air line attached to the machine. Now, it's the connection to the machine you also need to think about. Now, I'm sure most compressors will come with the female coupler already attached, or certainly in the kit so that you can attach it once you set it up. That then allows you to plug your airline in very quickly and easily. Now, because I keep my compressor up above in the attic space, I've got an airline which takes it from there down to the body of the workshop. I think it's probably about 10 meters long. I bought it nearly 30 years ago, and it's absolutely in perfect condition. It doesn't get the sunlight on it, so there's been no damage from ultraviolet rays or anything like that. So this is how I bring down the air from the attic to the body of the workshop. And then I plug into the female end here one of these extension airline reels, and that's where that extension airline gets plugged into, and then the business end is here. And I'm not sure how long this one is. It's probably 8 meters at least, I'm sure. And you can roll this out to wherever you want it. You've got then a female connector there for your tool, and when you've finished using it, you give it a sharp pull and it then retracts. There's an added gadget I've got here which I'll try and expose now so you can see it. Now, this is an oiler, and the idea is that when you're having a session for the day, you'd unscrew a little screw here, and you'd fill this little reservoir here with oil, put the screw back on. And then you plug your tool in, and as it's drawing air, so it's drawing a tiny weeny drop of oil as well. And I'm now going to show each of these tools in use. I've put a little drop of oil down through the entry pipe of all of them, so they're all ready to go. And the first tool I'm going to show you is this little baby stapler. Now, it's terribly easy to use and very fast. This is the only one of my tools which does not have a safety feature. The next one will be this brad nailer, and I've got fitted inside here some, I think they're 30mm long brads. So this time, take one of these blocks, take this, and there we can see the simplicity of using a tool like that. I'm just going to remove that, and this one has a safety feature. It's this red-ended thing here. When that's in contact with the wood, then the machine is armed and you pull the trigger and a brad will come out. Next will be this larger stapler, and I'll put it straight into the same place. This one has a safety feature, and it's this lifting mechanism here. And that's popping those staples in, and these are pretty strong when they're in, so it's quite a useful tool. And finally, we'll move on to our big framing nailer. Now this one has a safety feature at the end here, and the idea is you push down and then pull the trigger. And you can see there that went with suitable excitement, and those are those nails in. So this is a fairly hefty tool and absolutely brilliant if you're building a barn. I want to point out a really important safety feature. Now, when you're putting any type of nail in using an air tool, you've really got to think to yourself, where should I put my hand? And it's not unusual for a nail, rather than going straight down into a piece of wood, to take a curved path. And I hope to be able to demonstrate that now. Can you see that nail came out just there? And so did that one. Now just imagine if I was holding this like this and something like that, it would go right through your finger and it wouldn't half hurt. So be very, very careful. Never have your hands anywhere where a nail could continue through. Well, I hope this brief introduction to the use of a compressor and various small workshop air tools has been a help. This compressor by Swan, this Oilless compressor, is absolutely the bee's knees. And when I saw one a couple of years ago, I immediately wanted to get one, and I got it as soon as I could. So there we go. I hope this helped. Now remember the safety things I've pointed out: ear defenders, eye protection, and also keep your fingers well away from anywhere that a nail or staple could come through. Thank you very much for watching. Take care. Bye-bye.